So next up is David Simon. David Simon has a PhD, JD, and LLM, and he's a research fellow at the Petrie Flom Center for Health Law, Policy, Biotechnology, and Bioethics at Harvard Law School, and a lecturer on law at Harvard Law School. His current research focuses on innovation in drug and device development and informational market failures. He also writes in private law jurisprudence and intellectual property law more generally. His current projects include drug development, pricing and repurposing, device regulation, and the philosophy of intellectual property.
All right, thanks to Anya and to the organizers of RIBS. Thanks to Iowa for hosting, and to all of you who are attending in person and online. The talk today I'm going to give is called Devices as Billboards. And to introduce the talk, I'm going to show you 3 pictures. This is Bart Giamatti. Bart Giamatti was the commissioner of Major League Baseball in 1989. This is a picture from a television camera of original Yankee Stadium around 1990, the area behind home plate. This is a similar picture from the home of the Lovable Losers, the Chicago Cubs, my home team, around that same point in time. Now, what these 3 pictures have in common is they represent a form of baseball purity. In an age of increasing commercialization, the area behind home plate was considered sacrosanct by Giamatti, by the owners of the Cubs and the Yankees. But technological changes, such as live television broadcast of games, had made the area behind home plate increasingly valuable real estate. Most eyeballs were glued to that real estate through a television camera. So perhaps it was a foregone conclusion that in 1996, the Yankees introduced advertising in that space. And in 2004, the Cubs followed. And as technology improved and televisions became clearer and bigger, both baseball teams and advertisers figured out a way to expand the space behind home plate to advertise more. And so the question I want to ask, using this area behind home plate as a metaphor for those of you that follow baseball, is, are devices the new space behind home plate? That is, will we start to see advertising on medical devices the same way we start to see advertising behind home plate in baseball? So to do this, I want to talk about some of the similarities between the area behind home plate and medical devices. Then I'll talk about some of the differences. And then I'm going to talk about what potential futures we might see given this analogy. And finally, I'll talk about some of the solutions to problems raised by this problem. So the first thing to do is look at the similarities. And one of the similarities is we're seeing incredible technological innovations in devices. And what started off as, for example, analog glucose monitors, where you prick your finger and you take a reading and the glucose monitor shows you your glucose levels, have moved onto smartphones. And now you can check your glucose levels with an app wirelessly. You don't need anything else. And of course, the move onto smartphones and devices, onto smartphones and other wearable technologies means that there's this increasing access to consumers in the same way that television-enabled baseball owners and commercial advertisers access to people who are watching the games. There's also a profit motive driving both kinds of players. Major League Baseball is a for-profit institution, and all the teams are looking to make money. And there's a profit motive for device manufacturers. Finally, there's a public trust constraint. In other words, the reason there was no advertising behind home plate at Wrigley Field and at Yankee Stadium was because the public didn't want it, but the commercial interest became too overpowering. And similarly, there's no advertising currently, as far as I can tell, on medical devices. And part of that is because there's this public trust constraint. But there are also significant differences. Right? The stakes are much higher for medical devices. Consumers who see advertisements for products they don't need might be more likely to buy them if they're in a state of distress. And those products that they buy might actually make them worse off. Whereas in baseball, if somebody sees an advertisement for PNC Bank, they may be worse off, but not in a significant way. There are also significant legal obstacles to advertising on devices. The Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act limits what device manufacturers can say and how they can say it. There are laws called anti-kickback statute and Stark laws, which prevent certain kinds of referral arrangements. A device manufacturer can't refer somebody to a product or service that's reimbursable by the federal government, by federal healthcare programs, and some states have similar laws with similar prohibitions. And finally, there's actually more potential benefits, just like there's more potential risk. Consumers might be able to find physicians or services that they might not otherwise have been privy to through access to advertisements for those goods or services. So I can see at least 2% potential scenarios for where devices could start advertising in the same way that baseball teams started to advertise. One is you might see related ads. So you can, because the prohibition on advertising and referral arrangements applies only to products and items and services that are reimbursable by a federal healthcare program. If it's not reimbursable by a federal healthcare program, there's no federal restriction under the anti-kickback law. And so you might, for example, if you're using a glucose monitor, you might get an advertisement for glucose tablets, which are not reimbursable, or some other product or service, an app that helps you meditate, or an app that helps you eat more healthy. So you could see that kind of situation. The other kind of situation is you might get app developers, device manufacturers creating marketplaces where you can access a physician, and physicians will pay to be in the marketplace, and the physicians in turn get priority access to patients with diabetes. You might want to find a provider who specializes in diabetes or wound care or whatever. And so you can click through on the app and get right into a marketplace where you can find a physician. And under the anti-kickback laws at present, this would not be a problem provided certain conditions were met. So obviously there's a variety of problems with having these advertisements on devices, and there are certain ways we can tamp down the bad effects. One is to take a regulatory approach. We could probably extend the anti-kickback law to cover other kinds of services. Maybe we could try to do that. That might prevent some of these nefarious referral arrangements that have arisen in other contexts that gave rise for the need for these anti-kickback and Stark laws. We could also try to manage data better, have more strict data policies with respect to certain kinds of health information, and impose penalties on firms that violated these data protection and data practices. We also might want to encourage firms to adopt particular practices by providing them some kind of benefit, a subsidy in the form of a tax credit, or maybe even a direct payment. There are also non-regulatory approaches we could take. We could train physicians on the types of devices they're likely to encounter and try to educate patients about what they're likely to see and what is good and what is bad. And then we also can rely on public interest groups and public pressure. If there is a really bad arrangement that arises, usually a really nefarious kind of referral arrangement that arises, usually there's significant public outcry, and that will act as kind of constraint. In some, this is kind of a future casting exercise. What I expect we can see on the changing landscape of medical devices, and hopefully we will be prepared to address some of these challenges.